July 2007, Tallow Oil and Cosmos Energy discovered oil in commercial quantities off the west coast of Ghana. The Jubilee field, so christened by Ghana in commemoration of its 50th anniversary of independence, thus became a commercial oil and gas producer, with reserves estimated at 700 million barrels of oil and 800 billion cubic feet of gas. Development of the field was done on a fast-track basis, and in December 2010, oil production was officially launched.
Today, we are pouring out our first oil from the Jubilee field. And we must give thanks to God for giving us this natural asset.
At a time when oil prices were very high, thus piquing interest in oil, Ghana's discovery of a significant oil find, which was deemed world-class, attracted global attention, including from international oil companies. The need to ensure that operations were undertaken well so as to inure to the benefit of Ghanaians could not be overemphasized. While some saw the production of oil in commercial quantities as a catalyst for growth, as its revenues would provide massive financial resources needed to address the huge infrastructure gap in the country, others were worried about how the corrosive effect of oil wealth could create the proverbial oil curse, as seen in neighboring oil-rich African states.
We felt that if God has blessed us with another natural resource, this resource has to be able to function well to the benefit of Ghanaians. And because of that, some of us met and decided, let's try as much as possible to get the government to realize that this particular type of venture is an important one, because we found the accountability and transparency issues with the gold industry had not really boded well for this country. And that was the inception of PIAC.
With over a century of mining of mineral resources and very little to show for it, there were attempts to ensure efficiency in the management of the emerging oil and gas sector. Forums were organized to solicit input into the development of the governance framework for oil and gas, but opportunity for civil society organizations' participation in the process was limited. Subsequently, a consultative CSOs forum was organized in Mankasim in the central region to help collate the input of the group into a national consultative dialogue planned to be held at Gimpa in February 2008. The Gimpa Forum determined that Ghana's Petroleum Exploration and Production Law, PNDC Law 84, enacted in 1984, was not fit for purpose and therefore needed to be overhauled or replaced. This, however, was not done until 2016, when the outdated law was replaced with the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act 2016, Act 919. As a result of the delay in addressing the gaps in the law, disputes that arose between the state and some of the Jubilee partners in the intervening period, bordering on responsibility for pollution, infringement on GNPC's proprietary right to geoscience data, and the country's right of first refusal in the disposal of assets, couldn't be addressed within PNDC's Law 84.
I got support from development partners to organize a civil society preparatory meeting where ordinary citizens, organized and unorganized, determined that they want to be part of the governance arrangements for the petroleum sector. And so I carried this over to the Oil for Development Conference when I had the opportunity to chair the governance session. And from then on, there was a series of engagements, consultations that eventually led to a framework that provided for citizens' involvement in the management of and use of petroleum revenues in the form of the Public Interest and Accountability Committee.
From the Mankasim consultations, civil society organizations began to push for inclusion in the governance arrangement in the petroleum sector. It was clear They did not want to leave the management of the resource entirely in the hands of politicians and technocrats alone. They demanded an additional public oversight role to ensure that duty bearers are properly held accountable for the management of petroleum revenues. The Petroleum Revenue Management Act 2011, which seeks to guide the spending of petroleum revenues, was the first law to be enacted 3 years after the consultations in March 2011.
When the Revenue Management Act was now done and PIAC was put into it, when it now got to Parliament, parliamentarians at the time felt that it was a duplication of parliamentary work, in that it was up to Parliament to supervise how these funds should be spent. And so they took quite a lot of the clauses out of the Revenue Management Act that they felt were a duplication of their work. And one of them was PIAC. So some of us went to Parliament, myself, Honorable Amin. We were then asked to go and defend it. So the team met, outlined everything, and we went into Parliament, and it was a heated discussion, very heated discussion with the Mines and Energy Committee. But luckily in the end, they saw what we were talking and the arguments we were putting forward, and then decided to reinstate nearly all the clauses that were taken out. And that was the beginning of real putting PIAC together.
The Public Interest and Accountability Committee was subsequently established under Section 51 of the PRMA to, among others, monitor and evaluate compliance with the Act. The committee was inaugurated and commenced work on 15 September 2011 without any funds to facilitate its operations.
Revenue Watch and some other NGOs, international NGOs like GIZ, they came together, saw the need to keep the committee going, because as at that time, no provision had been made for our funding, no provision had been made for offices, secretariat, nothing. We were just there. Our first report came out in 2012. Included in our terms of reference in the law was a requirement to hold public fora, but it did not restrict the number and so on and so forth. And so we saw an opportunity to propagate our reports by holding regional debates throughout the country. So in the first year, after launching the report itself and making it available to the press, we also undertook a trip to the Western region and the Ashanti region. Those are the two big regions where, if you like, the metropolitan regions. And judging from the reaction of the people who attended, we were quite satisfied that we were on the right track.
For a committee that has been established by law, one would wonder why it had to rely on donor support to be able to carry out its mandate as prescribed in the law. Initially, resources were provided by GIC to fund PIAC programs, including compilation and publication of statutory reports. NRGI made office space available for PIAC to use as its secretariat for about 18 months, but did not provide direct funding.
We inherited a lot of problems on the grounds that funds were not forthcoming. And thanks to the media, they talked a lot on our behalf. And as a result, donor funding was coming. And I'm happy that the NRGI, Natural Resources Governance Institute, wrote a lot of proposals with the former chairman, Major Ablo. And when he was leaving office, these proposals materialized. We didn't have the technical men. So we served as technical men on the technical committee. So we collect the data, meet for about 2 weeks, come out with the dummy, and then give it to a consultant. Yes, this went on during my period for that purpose. And we were finding things a little bit difficult until the Deputy Minister of Finance saw that we are in their need of a vehicle. So they invited me, interviewed me, and then put my problems before her. That is accommodation. But they saw the need that we need a vehicle. So a V8 vehicle as a surprise was given to me. Even the minister was making a fun. Take it to Cape Coast. Anytime that you are coming, you bring it along. Then I said that this vehicle was purposely given to us to facilitate easy administration and management of PIAC.
The committee thus expanded its public engagement to cover both districts and regions. It was also able to start monitoring of projects that had received funding from the ABFA. The establishment of the PIAC Secretariat to help the committee in its work was provided for by the Act. After the committee was established in 2011, there was no functional secretariat, partly due to the inadequate funding. The current coordinator, Isaac Jamina, who joined the secretariat at the inception stage, recounts the difficulties back then.
I happened to have joined the secretariat in 2012, and at the time, I met a national service person. She was the only staff the secretariat then, if we would even call it a secretariat, had. And when I joined, I had to do almost everything. We didn't have an office. I think our office was the conference room for the Revenue Watch Institute then, which later became the Natural Resource Governance Institute. I virtually had to do everything from drafting letters to printing to going to deliver them, everything. And this continued until the national service person completed her service and left.
The technical manager provides an overview of the provision made to beef up the secretariat.
There was the need through a DFID-led and NRGI-supported study that there's the need to beef up the manpower capacity of the committee to carry out and fulfill its mandate. So in 2015, there was a recruitment process, and then I was brought on board to head the technical department. I had an assistant also brought on board at that time, and the mandate given to us was that in the shortest possible time, we should take over the writing of the committee's reports. That was very central to our recruitment, because at that time, we were outsourcing the writing of the committee's reports to consultants. But then there was the need to have an in-house capacity that will take over the writing of the reports in order to speak to the content of the report through media engagement, citizen engagement, and also when we engage with relevant stakeholders like Parliament, Ministry of Finance, and also the Presidency.
The finance manager explains that government now fully funds PIAC.
In 2018, they were doing 50-50%. So it was like a transition to able to hand over to government to fully fund PIAC. So in 2019, government was now doing 70 and the donor was now doing 30. Then 19, government took over. Donor actually ended in 19 and the government took over fully in 2020. So 2020 till now, we've been fully funded by government, and I can say on authority that our funds have been released to us, though sometimes delays, but we do get our full funding within the period and we're able to take on our activities.
For a committee that had such a difficult start, it has achieved a lot in ensuring transparency in the management of the country's petroleum revenue. PIAC has in the last 10 years carried out its threefold mandate of monitoring and evaluation compliance with the PRMA, providing space and platform for public debate, and carrying out independent assessment of the management and use of petroleum revenues to assist Parliament and the Executive in the oversight and the performance of related functions. The responsiveness of the reporting institutions has also improved significantly in the last 10 years.
Petroleum resources will finish at some point. And when it finishes, then the revenue, we don't have it any longer. So whatever we have, we should invest it in a very targeted way that it becomes a lasting benefit even for future generations. So you will realize that the Petroleum Revenue Management Act delineates how that should be done. And over time, we have realized that government have not been very consistent with some of the provisions, and that is a worry. However, a few things have been done. For instance, if you look at, you check the PIAC reports, we have done some investments with the petroleum revenue, which can have a lasting benefit into the future. In the time that even petroleum resources are over, there will be something to show off. For instance, the Kotoka Terminal 3 of the Kotoka International Airport has benefited from petroleum revenue, even though not entirely. It is not the petroleum revenue entirely that built it, but it's received from. So at least we can lay claim to it.
10 years is long enough for the committee to reflect on what it has done and how it can help strengthen the need for more accountability and transparency in the management of the country's petroleum revenues. The committee has successfully ignited awareness in the ordinary people about the country's oil resources.
Listen to the name of the committee. It's a public interest and accountability committee. And that is where I think PIAC needs to focus its attention now. How do we make a critical transition from transparency to accountability, which is the essence of the committee? And so I would say PIAC has achieved a lot in terms of promoting transparency, but a lot remains to be done on the accountability front. And to do that may require some amendments to the Petroleum Revenue Management Act, perhaps to give PIAC more powers, if not, to ensure that at least there's some level of collaboration between PIAC and the state accountability authorities, so that at least they are able to follow up on the findings of PIAC in terms of bringing some finality to the malfeasance that are unearthed in PIAC's reports.
For Technical Manager Obeng Edu Ajiman, the immense impact of PIAC is evident in the reports the committee has published.
Are you going to have this conversation with regards to gold revenue, or diamond revenue, or timber revenue? You won't. We are having this conversation because of PIAC. That's every 6 months, PIAC will issue a report accounting for how petroleum revenue has been utilized. We don't have such conversation around minerals revenue. So, by and large, that has been the impact of the committee. That every 6 months, citizens and relevant stakeholders look forward to the committee issuing an accounting report on how the state has expended and managed our petroleum revenue. There have been a lot of impact with regards to the committee's work. A lot of impact. When GMPC decided to sponsor our national football team, the Black Stars, through the feedback from citizens, we realized that that was not the way to prudently use petroleum revenue. We made a recommendation to Parliament, and Parliament actually directed GMPC to put an end to that sponsorship. That's an impact.
The existence of PIAC, to a large extent, makes sure that government's decisions on spending of oil revenue is targeted at the areas which they had set themselves to do in the budget.
10 years on, PIAC continues to highlight issues that require attention in the management of petroleum revenue. The revenue continues to be used as counterpart funding for projects, making it difficult to measure the impact of the use of the revenue. The ABFA continues to be spread thinly on projects, and the selection of the priority areas continue to be guided by the medium-term framework of succeeding governments instead of the default position of the law that requires spending to be guided by a long-term national development plan. The PRMA, which created PIAC, is currently under review. What does this mean for PIAC and its existence?
There's a lot of transparency under the PRMA, but PIAC is not empowered to basically hold accountable people that have engaged in violations of the PRMA. So when we went on the tours, there was this frequent advocating by people that PIAC should be vested with prosecutorial powers. Now, PIAC is not necessarily of the position that it should be granted prosecutorial powers in order to hold people accountable. Now, the approach could be that when PIAC uncovers all these malfeasances, etc., that these matters should be referred to the Office of the Special Prosecutor to do investigation into the matter and, where need be, engage in prosecution of those that are found to have engaged in violations of the PRMA.
Unless and until PIAC is given enough teeth to bite, sharper teeth than those of the babies, we are not going anywhere.
What then can be done to ensure PIAC continues to play its role effectively and ensure that the country achieves optimum benefit from this natural resource? Professor Kwame Adom-Frimpong is current chairman of PIAC.
Our mandate is to monitor petroleum revenue. As far as the petrol extraction is still in process, and we continue to perform or carry on our mandate. I see PIAC in the next 10 years, as far as the process continues, I'm sure there will be an improvement more than what we have even done. And Ghana will benefit a lot as far as developmental purposes are concerned. As you are aware, that's one of our limitations. You see the drawbacks, you bring it out, but you don't have any enforcement power to enforce it. So it will be one of my proposals, whether we can have power to prosecute those who go against the rules, that is the act. If you are able to get that one, then you see how powerful PIAC could be.
With a 10-year history of immense impact, the Public Interest and Accountability Committee is largely a success story, one of policing the management and use of the country's oil resources to ensure the ordinary citizen benefits.
I congratulate the Public Interest and Accountability Committee, PIAC, on the celebration of its 10th anniversary, and I'm grateful for the invitation to participate in this important occasion and make this brief address.
In the year 2021, PIAC is celebrating 10 years under the theme Strengthening Citizens' Ownership and Understanding of PIAC and its oversight of petroleum revenue management with a number of activities. PIAC has been a bastion of transparency, probing and succeeding largely at the difficult work of extracting accountability from an industry that is still making strides in transparency. But there's more room as PIAC leadership continue to shift from transparency to accountability and demand more accountability from government on the management and use of revenue accruing from the oil and gas industry in Ghana.